Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Wendy.
You find positive things about Miley Cyrus, and I'm not seeing those reported in the popular media. So where did you find that she was the second biggest charitable contributor?
Google.
You just, okay, so
honestly,
Googling Miley Cyrus doesn't happen in my life. So it's out there like some kind of Forbes report or something.
Yeah, the question was, for those of you who might not have heard, how do I find stuff about Miley Cyrus being the second biggest contributor in the entertainment world, because it's not generally being reported? I just use Google, and I just follow paths wherever they lead me. I was Googling Miley Cyrus, I followed this link, it took me there. I can't remember exactly what the sequence was. It's out there. Go out and find it, and use our brains. Other questions? Yes, Susan.
Kind of a comment. I think that negative commentary comes through on video games too. You always hear people talking about how bad it is for these kids to be playing these video games all the time. A couple of things that I've noticed though. Generally, they're independent warriors. That's the thing. The eye-hand coordination is amazing. I have a kid I taught to do payroll. It took him like 5 seconds. He can enter faster than anybody I've ever seen. And it definitely, I don't know, I don't think it's as bad as what people make out. And I think when you push them away like that, it makes that space bigger.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who might not have heard, what Susan said was, another area of criticism is video games. And video games get a lot of negative talk about them, and there are in fact some positive things to be said about video games. Here's unfortunately one of my deficits as a cultural critic. Believe it or not, I'm not a big video game person. I don't find a lot of time for them. They take a lot of time. They can be fun, sure, and there's some good stuff out there. But yes, Susan is absolutely right. They teach hand-eye coordination. A lot of them, especially those that are first-person type of video games, they're about a lone individual standing up and fighting for whatever they are after, which is, again, a species of liberty message. That's about all I can say because, again, I'm not a video game person. But, yeah, Susan, thank you. That's an awesome point. Sean.
Nathan, I think the best part of your message is that it's better to be positive than to be negative. But when it gets to the practical part, it seems like you're saying if we can find some silver linings, that mitigates against the impact that popular culture has on attitudes and votes and the direction people go. And so we have this little contrarian interpretation and all these things that you're describing, but most people see most of those messages and still decide Republicans are bad guys, Democrats are good guys, I'm a liberal, that's the message. When conservatives talk about the failings of popular culture, they often are thinking about how can we change the messages in popular culture? How can we add to them? How can we bring new perspectives to the universe? And I'm not sure that trying to be positive about hidden interpretations gets us where we need to go to dampen the liberalizing effect of popular culture.
It's an interesting point. Now let's consider what our alternatives are here. For some context here, Sean and I were involved in a chat today about the whole Miley Cyrus issue, and Sean was taking a very strong stance against what Miley Cyrus is doing. That's fine. I want to go back to something I said earlier. If you're a 12-year-old girl, how much are you going to care that your parents say that Miley Cyrus is a bad influence if you think she's awesome? So the question becomes then, how is the message that we put out there going to be taken? Sure, we can get out there and try to push things in a different direction, but when it comes to messaging, we can only push to the extent that our influence is being heard. And if people are saying, well, there's those conservatives again, going off about bad morals and bad examples, are we being heard? Are we doing anything to influence the directions that things are going? I contend that no, we're really not. Now, there is another aspect to what you're saying, which is push the culture in another direction, and if we start producing our own content, well, sure, we could start pushing from that direction. But again, that's a very high bar to clear. So the avenue that, at least to me, that seems to remain is find the messages in there, and I don't think it's so much a question of going for anything really obscure as going for what the people who made this stuff perhaps didn't even think about. I don't think the director, Neil Blomkamp of Elysium, I don't think he thought for a second that he was telling an anti-government story. I don't think that thought occurred to him for one cold second. I don't care. I don't care, because that message is in there, and I want to shine my light on it. I want to get people to see that, because when they see that, they're going to see then the resonances in the real world and start to nod along, especially if I've said, yeah, Elysium is an interesting movie. I don't have to say it's a good movie, because it's not. It's an interesting movie. It yields some interesting results. Yes?
Since you are interested in alternative interpretations of movies, look up the one for Elysium that was recently published in the American Conservative magazine.
Okay.
A very different take on it.
Fantastic. I will look up the interpretation of...
The director did not intend to make it a socialist movie at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to have to take a look. Brian?
I really like what you're doing, where you're going with it. And I've heard Tom Cranwitter talk. Obviously, I was in School of Persuasion. Like I was telling Chris, I skipped a grade. I didn't do all PR. I went straight to School of Persuasion.
You're gifted.
And Tom Cranwitter has this idea that you're expounding here, that we've got to have that liberty message and make it sound appealing. But we've got to remember, too, that the hippies of the 60s who said, don't trust your government, became the statists of today that are leading our government to socialism. And I like what you're doing, but my contention is that it gets us maybe to the point where we're even. If you've got this liberty message, and you say, yeah, I saw this movie Elysium, where I saw Miley Cyrus, who's free to shake her whatever on stage while she's giving all this money to charity, and the liberals are saying, yeah, that's what we've been talking about. You get it now. We still have to come back to them and say, but this is the bad thing about the way you believe it. Because otherwise we're not going to win. Because I can have the greatest liberty message in the world, and they say, yeah, we like liberty too, and we're going to give you shit.
Let me put this in some context. Now, in addition to being a graduate of LPR, I'm also involved in a group called Liberty Toastmasters, where we learn how to publicly speak. And it's been a tremendous experience. And one of the things I've learned in Liberty Toastmasters, when somebody gives a speech, there's somebody who is assigned the job of evaluating their speech and giving them some feedback. And there's a standard rule of thumb, and Brad, perhaps you can help me out on here what the ratio is, but you're supposed to say about 3 good things for every bad thing you say. Is that roughly it? That, right now, we're saying all bad stuff about the culture. We're not saying anything good for the most part. So that's the part where people shut down. I think there is absolutely a place for cultural criticism that says this is not a good direction to go. But people need to be listening to us, and they're not going to be listening to us so long as that is the only message. It's a little bit of boy who cried wolf syndrome. Now, if we can shift the balance to where we're saying 3 or 4 good things for every bad thing, then maybe the bad stuff that we say, the criticisms that we have to offer, will be taken more seriously, and people will listen and say, you know what, that's a good point. Did you have one?
What do you mean?
Well, did you? I thought you had your hand up.
I
No?
did, because I want to go back to what Sean was saying about this sort of obscure countercultural reference, obscure findings, things that he is interpreting what you're talking about as. I think the key in what your formula was that you put forward was, how are people identifying themselves? You know, I am a liberal, and therefore I'm going to go with this side. I am Miley Cyrus. I identify with Miley Cyrus. I don't. Let me just make that clear. let me just make that very, very clear.
Wait a second. Does that mean no twerking later?
No twerking later. Sorry, sweetheart. You know,
Wendy?
but a 12-year-old girl who says, I identify with Miley Cyrus, if we then identify Miley Cyrus as, you know, having these conservative messages, then the person who identifies with that celebrity is going to look at themselves a little bit differently. And I think that's kind of key to what Nathan is talking about, is looking at, okay, I identify with the message in that movie. The message in that movie is more conservative than I thought it was. And they may not put that word with it, but...
And there's another point to be made here. I'll come back. Hold on. There's another point to be made here, and that is that culture has momentum. This year, the last couple, 3 years, gay marriage became a really big deal. Who saw that coming 10 years ago? Couple hands. Who saw that coming 20 years ago? It was in the works for a while. Will and Grace was a TV show 20 years ago. This has been in the offing for a good 20 years. Culture has momentum. And right now we are experiencing the momentum of 20, 30, 40 years of concerted effort. And we have been very ineffective for that same time period. If we can start to get the momentum going in the other direction, then the things maybe become a little bit easier for us. But that's going to require a good long time, repeated effort. It's not a one-time thing. It's not, oh, I said something nice about Oprah Winfrey's new movie, I'm done. No, we've got to push and push and push. It's a long-term strategy. Sean.
I like what you say. I like what Chris says about finding the best interpretation we can, but it's still a tiny voice. The influence of popular culture pushes most people left. The only way we can change the game is to change the output of popular culture, not to argue contrarian interpretations, because no one hears our contrarian interpretations. Most people walk into the movie theater and see the message and decide that conservative is bad, liberal is good.
I think that is to a certain extent that is true, yes. I think that is true because people aren't listening to us. People aren't listening to us. We are them. We're not us. We're not part of the majority. And so first we need to get back to being associated as us. Then we might get listened to more, and then we can start to shift things. Tim, did you have one?
Yeah, I did. I've spent my entire adult life trying to persuade people that there is a media bias. And now, since 1997, when Fox News comes in, people are starting to go, oh yeah, maybe there's a media bias. And so the fire hose of the popular culture is versus my eyedropper of conservative response. It's just overwhelming. And I guess my point is that, do you believe there's going to be a backlash to the progressive agenda here in Colorado and nationwide over the last 5 years? Is there going to be... the pendulum swung, it swung a lot. And so, is it going to swing back? And if it swings back, do we want to be in the position of saying, yeah, well, we thought Miley Cyrus dancing on the stage was pretty okay because she gave a lot of money to charity? Or do we want to be, see, there's a difference. There's their agenda, there's our agenda.
Is the pendulum going to swing back? Maybe. But we can't guarantee it. We can't count on it. And if it does swing back, has the base shift? Anybody ever played with a tabletop, desktop pendulum, and you get it swinging, and if it's an off-balance pendulum, it starts scooting. And it starts scooting. Even though the pendulum is swinging back and forth, the base is moving over here. That's what's been happening. So even if the pendulum does start to swing back of its own accord, we're still going in this direction.
So, do we go back in your slides to the slide of the bell curve? And let me ask a follow-up.
Sure, give me a second here. I put my my clicker away, so
We
there
all
it
know
is.
what a bell curve looks like.
Yeah.
We're going to take a little bit.
I love his colors, though. I want to use
Hey,
them.
Nathan,
Yes.
you're going back there. Next order of questions is here and then over to Greg.
Okay, yeah. Well, in the meantime, while I'm going back, please.
I want to make one point, and that is, you keep using the term popular culture. And there was an artist, and I'm sure everybody here might know the rap group from the early 90s, Public Enemy. Well, Professor Griff was one of the artists in that group, and he made a very good point that when an artist makes music and after a while he becomes popular, or the individual becomes popular, they end up losing their independence. So, you know, Professor Griff or so-and-so can't go out and support certain things because their literal name and face is owned by the label company or whoever is funding them. Okay, now it goes down to two things. The fact that certain people in popular culture can't speak out the way they would like to because of the restrictions their labels put on them. And two, the money. The money is very central because what drives, quote, popular culture is who gets funded. And if you start going to a certain direction that your label or funder doesn't like, then you don't get funded. So any person that is trying to make money as an artist or in popular culture as an actor or a speaker aren't going to go against the grain in that sense because they'll lose their money.
Sure.
And it really comes down to the fact that popular culture is driven by the money. Money is everything in our culture. So popular culture is literally all the, Professor Griff was his name. And
Yeah.
he made a very good point that now that he is out of public enemy and that he's free to speak his mind on certain things, he is able to go out and basically start enforcing some of the messages that you were referring to in some of those songs that weren't necessarily, liked in that time period,
Right.
because of what it was. But I think that if you go back now and to look at some of the lyrics, he was trying.
Sure.
But that's my main point is
Yeah,
money and their inability to speak out the way they want to.
It's a great point. I'd like to add one thing on to that. Does anybody remember a few years ago there was a spate of movies that came out about the Iraq War, the second Iraq War? There was In the Valley of Elah. There was, what's... no, that's not one of them. Stop Loss. There was one, a Rendition. That's the title I was trying to think of. Every single one of those movies tanked. Every single one. And in the meantime, a couple years ago, there was a movie, and what's Acts of Valor, made about Navy SEALs, with Navy SEALs as actors. It made back its production budget 4 or 5 times. Did great. So and this speaks to, again, the power of the market. There is a certain amount of ability that we have to, when a movie does come up that supports our values on whatever level, go out and support them. But this also speaks to the fact that Hollywood has limited ability to put out movies that don't support anything that we do. Again, it all comes down to the individual. It all comes down to the power and the worth of the individual, and Hollywood can't afford to make too many flops. So they have to put that message in there whether they like it or not. So there was a question here? Yes?
Yeah, there's quite a few interesting points that you've made today. And I agree with some of them, and, I'm okay with some of them. No, I'm serious. So it's... And part of it, and I'm getting to it. And part of it is, I also agree with some of what Sean's saying. The point is that you're right. Popular culture is popular. People watch it. People watch movies. People, listen to music, etc., etc. The key that I see at a lot of this, and I think that you are getting onto that as well, is that we need to first off not prejudge the movie, music, or whatever based on whoever's political opinion is.
Absolutely.
Matt Damon's an idiot. I liked Elysium. Things blew up in it. That's why I watched it. That's why I watched the movie. I don't take a lot of moral morality out of my movies. If things blow up, I'm pretty good, and then occasionally I watch movies my wife likes. Okay, political agenda or not, but if it doesn't resonate a good message, you know what I mean? And Elysium had a pretty decent message, people fighting against plutocracy of, but you've got people like Rush Limbaugh going, oh, it's an anti-capitalist movie. It was not an anti-capitalist movie at all. The problem, there's lots of capitalism going down on Earth. So that's what the point that I was getting across is that what you're saying is good, but I don't see, and I have to agree with Sean with this, if we're sitting here, it's good to find the good messages in that, But ultimately, if we're going to try to shift the culture, we do have to get the content out there.
Sure, but again, very high bar to clear. It's
You're right.
expensive to make a movie, and not many are called, few are chosen. I don't disagree with that point at all.
I mean, there are
Yeah, a little bit. Again, look at how many movies I was able to find for the last 10 years. One more question here, and then Tim, I want to come back to you. Then I got to sit down, guys. So thank you guys so much. Yes.
Big Hollywood doesn't work any better than big government or big corporations in general. Kickstarter and Indiegogo are going to be the ones that are making the new content, and Frack Nation is a perfect example.
But $10.1 billion in ticket sales last year. Hollywood's doing fine. They're not going anywhere.
I think the future is different.
Tim, back on the bell curve.
If you're looking on your bell curve there, I agree with the slide you did with the red circle.
Oh, wait, not that red circle. That red circle.
I buy that. The problem I have is that we're trying to persuade those two white lines and maybe the first blue line to the right. But our leaders, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Bob Dole, etc., are over here in the first dark blue line. And they're trying to out-Democrat the Democrats. And so I'd like to try it once for the leader that's maybe in that second white line. And
Sure, that's a separate question, Albert, and I don't want to overstate the case. I don't think Bob Dole and Lindsey Graham are down here. This is where we find, oh gosh, who's the Green Party candidate in 2000? Ralph Nader. Down here is where we find Ralph Nader. Down here is where we find Naomi Wolf. Down here is where we find Nancy Pelosi. Barack Obama, sure. I think he's more up here. Up here is where we find John McCain, Lindsey Graham. And I'm not happy about that either, but that's a separate question. The question is about how do we influence people, and we're not going to influence people so long as they're not listening to us. And that is really the core. So, that's true. Thank you guys so very much. Thanks for coming out.